In this final video on Kant's ethics, I turn to the third formula of his highest moral principle, the categorical imperative, which is known as the formula of autonomy. Kant expresses this formula on page 43 toward the bottom. The formula of autonomy says, act always on a maxim that respects every rational being as a will that gives the universal law to itself. This sounds very similar to the first formula, the universal law formula. The difference is that here, Kant is identifying persons as the source of ethical value, and he's drawing an important consequence from that recognition. The important consequence is that persons are self-determining. We give the ethical law to ourselves. Now, that has two implications that will affect how we should act if we want to be good persons. First, although my values are fundamentally the same as your values, it would be a violation of your personhood to force you to follow my values rather than yours. What would be appropriate is for me to try to convince you through reason that I am acting in a way that is inconsistent with my own values. Again, your values are irrelevant to me, even if they are the same as mine. Ethical law must be self-imposed. It can't come from outside me. The second implication is just as important. It is not right for me to allow myself to be guided by any values apart from those I generate within myself and specifically within my reason. So, for example, to obey a religious authority because of their position, rather than because I believe what they say is right, would be unethical, because it allows someone else to take the place of my own reason. Caving to peer pressure is wrong for exactly the same principle. So why is it called the formula of autonomy when the word autonomy doesn't even appear in the formula? Kant discusses autonomy and heteronomy on page 52 of our reading. I'm going to start with heteronomy because I think the distinction becomes clearer that way. You know the prefix hetero from heterosexual, meaning that someone is attracted to people of the other sex. We'll probably stop using the term soon, now that we're finally recognizing that there are more than two sexes. The nomi part of heteronomy and autonomy comes from the ancient Greek word meaning law or government. Heteronomy for Kant means that I'm allowing my will to be governed by someone or something apart from my own reason. That's peer pressure, or blindly following some authority figure, or generally letting someone else determine my values for me. And autonomy is the opposite. The auto of autonomy is just the ancient Greek term for self. When I act autonomously, I'm governing myself. I'm allowing my will and my actions to be determined only by my own reason. There's just one thing that we need to add to this picture, and that is that Kant thinks that the urges, feelings, desires, etc., that we have as part of our search for happiness are not really rational. If I'm doing something because I think it will make me happy, instead of doing it because I believe that it's right according to the categorical imperative, I am willing and acting heteronomously. It's not just that heteronomy comes from letting other people prescribe my values to me. It also comes from me letting my search for happiness get the upper hand over my ethical reasoning, putting happiness before doing the right thing. There's one more distinction we'll study in Kant before we leave him behind, and this is where we really get into metaphysics. That's the distinction between the world of sense and the world of understanding. The world of sense is the world as it appears to us through our five senses, in space and time and governed by scientific laws. The world of sense is, for Kant, deterministic. Remember that Kant is himself a scientist, an astrophysicist who made important scientific discoveries, in addition to being a famous philosopher. The physical world behaves according to its own laws, and there are no exceptions to those laws. For example, There are no bodies in the universe that are not affected by gravitational attraction. And in Kant's time, the science of psychology is not very far advanced, but people already thought that the human psyche would turn out to be very much like the physical universe, that it would be governed by unchangeable laws of stimulus and response, output equals input. Kant's worry here is that there's no room for human freedom in this picture. If both the physical world and the psychological world, the world of consciousness, are governed by immutable scientific laws, how can we say that persons actually choose our actions? There is no question that we human beings do belong to this physical world, the world of sense. But Kant claims that in order to think of ourselves as free, we also have to think of ourselves as belonging to another world at the same time, the world of the understanding. The world of understanding for Kant is a kind of spiritual world that lies behind the world of sense and ultimately determines what happens in it. So Kant's conception of moral action is that we make decisions in the world of understanding that get carried out in the world of sense. That means he doesn't have to step away from his work as a scientist, where he believes we're able to find out the truth about physical and psychological reality. Now, it isn't that Kant thinks that the world of sense is an illusion. In fact, he thinks it's very real. Otherwise, science would be a complete waste of time. It's just that he thinks that there is a different perspective we should also take on our existence and must take on our existence if we are to account for our belief that we possess freedom of the will. And as soon as we ask ourselves, as we all do, what ought I do? What are my ethical obligations? For Kant, we are presupposing freedom. We are projecting ourselves into a supersensible world, a world that lies beyond the world that we can sense. In other words, you could say that for Kant, we have to think of ourselves as spiritual beings in addition to being physical ones. We're going to go into substantial detail in the last module of the course about the weaknesses and limitations of Kant's theory of ethics. The main point I'll make now, apart from the dolphin point of the last video, is related to how Kant conceives of reason. As you've seen, Kant wants to derive ethical principles from reason alone, without any influence coming from beyond reason. He can certainly be criticized for not including our relationships to the very real communities we belong to. And he probably doesn't have any very good way of accounting for the ethical obligations that we take on when we volunteer for a certain role, like a leader or a parent. Those are not universal ethical obligations. They belong to a person in a particular role in society where power and authority bring certain responsibilities along with them. But the main thing has to do again with Kant's conception of reason. He does not want us to be influenced in our ethical thinking by feelings and emotions, because they are not a part of reason, but separate from it. This is a point I want to question. Does Kant have the correct story about what reason is? Is it true that feelings and emotions are not a part of the way that we think? Indeed, that they ought not be part of the way that we think? Blaise Pascal was a philosopher and mathematician in the 17th century who said, "The heart has reasons that reason cannot fathom." Is it possible that the heart is able to gain access to deeper truths than the mind can? If that's the case, then Kant is probably mistaken and needs to expand his account of what aspects of existence should be included as part of reason. And that would change the whole picture.